Have you ever pulled back your energy, just to watch them spiral? You stopped texting first, stopped explaining yourself, stopped showing up with your heart wide open, and suddenly. And most importantly, why does going cold make them go crazy? This might sound counterintuitive. For years, you were told that communication fixes everything. That if you love someone. But when you withdrew, here's the hard truth most people won't admit. People often only value your presence when they feel the weight of your absence. It's not fair, but it's real. And until you master how to detach with calm, with strength, with intent, you'll always be dancing in the shadows of your own power. That's why today, we're not just talking about detachment. We're talking about why Stoicism, yes, the ancient philosophy, might be your most potent secret weapon in modern love. Because this video isn't about playing games. It's not about manipulation. It's about awakening to your power. The kind of power that comes from self-respect, emotional discipline, and the courage to be unavailable to those who are inconsistent with you. We'll explore the real reason they go crazy when you go cold, how men are psychologically wired to respond to withdrawal, and what makes you unforgettable when you stop chasing. This isn't fluff. This is strategy. This is where your entire dynamic shifts, because you're not the same woman anymore. You're learning to lead with your energy, not your emotions. You're finally tapping into the rhythm of Stoic relationships, where power isn't loud, but stillness is magnetic. So before we dive deep into the 6 undeniable shifts that happen when you go cold, ask yourself this: are you done overgiving? Are you tired of being predictable? Are you ready to stop chasing and start attracting? If you're nodding quietly to yourself right now, you'll see exactly how to flip the script and never lose your power again. Let's begin. 1. The power of pulling away. There's a moment most women never forget, not because it's loud, but because it's silent. It's not the argument. It's not the tears. It's not the begging. It's the stillness. The shift. Tired of shrinking yourself to seem less needy. Tired of pretending your standards were flexible when they weren't. So you stepped back. Not to play a game, but because your soul finally asked you to listen. And then something strange happened. The man who once made you feel invisible suddenly started looking for signs of life. Double texting. And maybe for a second you questioned yourself. Did he actually care all along? But deep down, you already knew the truth. He didn't come back because he loved you. He came back because he lost control. And that's the part we need to talk about, because most women misunderstand what this moment truly means. This isn't about him suddenly seeing your worth. It's about him suddenly feeling your absence. And if you're not emotionally disciplined, you'll take his reappearance as a sign to lower your guard again, to soften, to re-engage. But when you understand Stoic relationships, where love is built on emotional responsibility and power is quiet, you'll start to see this differently. You'll recognize that pulling away isn't about rejection, it's about correction. It's about realignment. It's about choosing peace over performance. Because the moment you go cold, you stop feeding the loop. And that loop is exactly what many men become addicted to. The comfort of your attention, the security of your availability, the ego boost of knowing you'll always respond. You were his emotional supply. Not because you wanted to be, but because you didn't yet know the strength of your energy. But the moment you pull back, the supply is cut off. And the reaction? It's not romantic. It's neurological. Dopamine. Disruption. Withdrawal. Just like any other high, the sudden stop creates chaos. The Stoic woman doesn't fear that moment, she studies it. She doesn't romanticize the ping of a late-night text. She analyzes it. She doesn't fall for intensity. She respects consistency. And that's where your power lies, in your ability to pause instead of pursue. Because here's the reality. Pulling away isn't about giving up. It's about leveling up. You are no longer reacting from anxiety. You are responding from awareness. You are no longer seduced by crumbs. You are demanding a full table. But this isn't easy. Especially if you've spent your whole life being the fixer, the giver, the one who bends just to keep peace. You might feel guilty. You might feel cold. When you remove yourself from a space that no longer honors you, you begin to remember your worth without needing anyone to confirm it. And from that space, you gain clarity. You begin to see who calls you when they can't use you, who respects you when you set boundaries, who disappears when the game ends. That clarity? It's painful at first, but it's purifying. It strips away the illusion. It forces you to confront the truth you always suspected but didn't want to name. And here's the truth most people run from: if someone only wants you when you pull away, they never truly valued you in the first place. They valued the version of you that catered to their comfort. The Stoic woman doesn't need to punish or explain. She just shifts. And in that shift, she watches. Because when you stop over-explaining yourself, you start observing others. When you stop managing their emotions, you start mastering your own. That is the power of pulling away, not as a weapon, but as wisdom. Your silence is a mirror. It reflects their behavior back to them. Some will run. Some will lash out. Some will try to bait you back into the old role. But the ones who are real, the ones who see your absence as a wake-up call rather than an ego wound, they'll rise. They'll self-correct. They'll respect the boundary instead of trying to bulldoze it. And even if no one comes back, even if the silence remains, you will still win. Because you stopped betraying yourself. That is the win. Clarity and power. I am choosing me. So ask yourself right now, where are you overextending? Who are you trying to convince? What would happen if you stopped showing up for someone who only notices you when you're gone? Would your world fall apart, or would theirs? That's what they never expect. That the one who gave endlessly would one day stop. And when she does, it echoes. Because when a woman with a warm heart goes cold, the silence burns louder than any scream. That's not cruelty. That's consequence. So don't flinch. Don't explain. Don't soften just because they react. Let your stillness speak. Let their chaos reveal itself. Let your absence be your answer. Because sometimes the strongest move isn't confrontation. It's retreat. Not out of fear, but out of truth. That's Stoicism in its highest form, not apathy, but sovereignty. Not detachment from love, but from illusion. And when you step into that level of calm power, you'll stop asking, "Why didn't they value me?" and start asking, "Why did I stay so long where I wasn't?" You'll stop chasing love that confuses you and start cultivating love that clarifies you. Because the woman who can walk away doesn't need to speak loudly. Her energy says everything. Her silence rewrites the story. Her calmness creates chaos, in them, not her. That is the power of pulling away. And if you can hold that silence, not as punishment, but as protection, you'll begin to attract not just attention, but alignment. Not just men, but men who are ready. That's where the game changes. That's where you rise. That's where you stop being an option and start being the standard. And from here on out, that's exactly what you are. 2. Why react strongly to withdrawal? Let's get brutally honest. When you pull away and they react, it's rarely about love. It's about control, comfort, and the disruption of a cycle they were benefiting from. Because here's the psychological reality. People become attached to patterns, not people. And when you were consistently present, emotionally available, reactive, giving, validating their silence, replying within seconds, explaining yourself, proving your worth, you removed your energy, and that wasn't just silence. That was power. And power taken back feels like chaos to someone who depended on it to feel superior. That's why they react so strongly. Because withdrawal, especially from a woman with emotional intensity, is a threat to their ego identity. You see, when you loved openly, you made them feel needed. That fulfilled a role for them, a subconscious sense of importance. Even if they were emotionally unavailable, Even if they were non-committal, your energy made them feel powerful. They were the sun, and you were orbiting. But when you stopped orbiting, they lost gravity. That's the part they don't say out loud. It's not about missing you. It's about missing the power they held when you still needed them. The Stoic lens teaches us that most human behavior is driven not by love, but by emotional economics. What am I getting? What does this cost me? When you were fully invested, they were on top of the power scale. But withdrawal flips the scale. And suddenly, they're not just reacting to you, they're reacting to the absence of power. That absence creates anxiety. That anxiety creates need. That need creates action. That's why someone who didn't care last week is suddenly double texting today. It's not because they had an epiphany about your soul, it's because they feel unstable without your presence. And the human brain doesn't like instability. Especially not the male ego. For many men, validation is currency. If you're no longer giving it, they'll scramble to get it back, any way they can. That's when you see love bombing, guilt tripping, ghosting and returning. Or the famous, "I miss you," out of nowhere. But pay attention. The Stoic woman does not respond emotionally. She studies. She observes. She waits. Because she knows, not all attention is affection. Not all reaction is love. Some reactions are just panic. The panic of losing a source of emotional fuel. The panic of no longer being worshipped. The panic of being irrelevant. That's what withdrawal triggers. And here's the deeper truth. They react because your energy was doing something for them they didn't even realize. You were grounding them, emotionally regulating them. And the Stoic woman knows that destabilization is not her problem to fix. It's a revelation, a mirror, a filter. Because anyone who truly loved you would have adjusted while you were still giving. You must understand how male psychology works in these moments. When you go cold, you activate something ancient in their wiring, the fear of loss, yes, but also the fear of insignificance. Most men are taught to associate emotional detachment with strength. But when a woman does it, especially one he thought he had wrapped around his finger, it shakes his foundation. Why? Because it contradicts his narrative. He was supposed to be the one in control. He was supposed to be the one with options. He was supposed to be the one deciding when and how things moved. But your silence? It flipped that script. It showed him that you choose too. And your withdrawal says something louder than any emotional outburst ever could. I'm not addicted to you. And that message is terrifying to someone who only felt confident in your addiction. This is where Stoicism becomes more than a philosophy, it becomes a lifestyle. Because emotional detachment, when it comes from self-respect rather than suppression, is magnetic. It's clear. It's commanding. And it doesn't chase anything. It attracts by standing still. That's the kind of woman who's unforgettable. Not because she was perfect, but because she was sovereign. She wasn't playing a game. She just stopped playing theirs. And when they react, when they panic, when they test your boundary just to see if it's real, that's the final confirmation that your silence is working. That's your cue not to respond, but to reinforce. Because if someone is only consistent when you're cold, they're not ready for the version of you that loves warm. Your value is not in how quickly you forgive, how fast you respond, or how much you accommodate. Your value is in your ability to remain calm when they're trying to provoke you, to remain clear when they're trying to confuse you, to remain still when they're trying to pull you back into the chaos. That is power. That is poise. That is Stoicism in love. And once you learn to stand in it, nothing they do surprises you anymore. You'll start to see the pattern, the same reappearances at the same moments, the same love confessions when they feel you slipping, the same emotional stories to try and pull at your empathy. You don't take every "I miss you" as gospel. You wait to see if they act like they remember who you are. Because you know, the ones who truly care won't wait until you're cold to warm up. They won't need to lose you to realize what you bring. They'll move with clarity, not chaos. They'll stay when it's quiet. They'll show up even when it's not convenient. That's the difference between love and control. One accepts your boundary. The other fights it. One grows through your distance. The other collapses. So let them react. Let them spiral. Let them feel what life is like without your energy feeding their sense of worth. Because the ones who are meant for you will respond with growth, not guilt. They'll understand your withdrawal wasn't a punishment, it was a boundary. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. And if that's too much for them, so be it. You didn't come here to be easy to consume. That question alone will change how you interpret their reaction. And the answer will always reveal itself, not in what they say, but in what they do after the silence. So take a breath. Reclaim your power. Don't flinch when they reach out. Observe, don't absorb. Decide, don't react. And let stoicism guide you through the noise. Because the more emotionally still you become. Do one thing for me right now, like this video and comment. Number 1, if this message speaks to your experience. And if you're ready to rise into your calmest, clearest, most powerful self, hit that subscribe button. Because the next part? It goes even deeper. 3. Emotional highs and the addiction to attention. Most people think attention is just a casual byproduct of connection, but it's not. It's a drug. The brain treats attention like a reward, like a hit of dopamine. Especially in romantic dynamics. Every time you laughed at his dry joke even when it wasn't funny. Every time you responded right away, without making him wait. It all formed a feedback loop, one where your presence validated his significance. And whether he admitted it or not, he got used to that loop. Addicted to it. Dependent on it. Not always consciously. But neurologically, emotionally, and behaviorally. So when you go cold, you're not just disappearing, you're triggering a withdrawal. You're removing the very stimuli that fed his ego. Your softness, he's left with his own emotional noise. That silence you gave him? It became a mirror. It reflected his own emotional inconsistency, his lack of depth, his inability to connect beyond ego. And for someone who used your energy as their emotional crutch, that's deeply destabilizing. We don't talk about this enough. You stopped clapping. You stopped replying. You stopped reacting. You weren't angry. You weren't cold-hearted. You were just done performing. And when the show ended, he didn't know who he was without your applause. This is where Stoicism cuts through the illusion. The Stoic woman doesn't mistake emotional intensity for connection. She sees the difference between addiction and affection. Just because he's pulling harder doesn't mean he loves deeper. It might just mean he's withdrawing harder. When someone grows addicted to your emotional high, they're not showing up for you. They're showing up for the way you make them feel. And that difference is everything. It's the reason some men only come alive when they think you're slipping away. They're not responding to your soul. They're reacting to their ego being starved. And what's wild is how many women get trapped in this loop, mistaking a dopamine crash for love. He chases when you pull away. You soften. He relaxes. You feel connection. Then he pulls back again. The loop resets. Your nervous system gets trained to believe the high of reconciliation is the same as intimacy. But it's not. It's just chemistry being manipulated by inconsistency. That's why Stoicism matters so much in modern love. It teaches you to detach from the emotional spikes, to watch without reacting, to feel without becoming consumed. Is this love, or is it just emotional gambling? Are you a partner, or just a fix for their boredom, insecurity, or need for validation? These questions hurt. But they free you. Because when you see the emotional highs for what they are, temporary illusions of connection, you stop chasing them. You stop letting a text at midnight override weeks of silence. You stop measuring love by effort in moments of panic. And you start seeing the bigger pattern. The ones who really value you don't need the withdrawal to act right. They're consistent because they're clear. But for those who live off the highs, your withdrawal is like cutting off oxygen. They go crazy because you interrupted their supply. It's not about missing you. It's about needing the hit. Needing the fix. Needing the emotional rush they used to get from your presence. And here's where it gets deeper: when you go cold, their brain doesn't just feel loss, it starts craving a comeback. A reunion. A moment that resets the high. That's why they pop back up with charm, promises, or even tears. They're not always lying. But real love isn't about how they feel when they lose you, it's about how they show up when they still have you. Stoic relationships are built on that principle. No one is chasing emotional spikes. They're seeking emotional stability. And when you stop giving the highs, the addicted ones will either evolve or exit. Some will lash out. Some will try to test you. Some will even accuse you of being cold, toxic, or manipulative. Because how dare you take back the attention they never earned in the first place? But you don't need to defend yourself. You do not re-engage with someone who only values your presence when it's in danger of disappearing. If he was addicted to the emotional high, let him crash. Let him feel the withdrawal. Let him sit in the silence long enough to question the source of his discomfort. Because maybe, just maybe, he'll finally realize he never wanted you. He just wanted what you gave him: attention, approval, identity, comfort, the illusion of importance. And when you no longer provide that, you're no longer useful. That's not love. That's use. That's dependency. That's emotional consumerism. And the Stoic woman does not allow herself to be consumed. She gives from overflow, not obligation. She connects from self-worth, not self-sacrifice. She sees love not as an addiction, but as alignment. And so she does not chase the highs. She seeks the steady. She seeks truth. She seeks clarity. And she's willing to be alone in that pursuit rather than be adored in confusion. That's what makes her so powerful. That's why they go crazy when she stops performing. Because her energy was never just sweet, it was stabilizing. And when it disappears, they feel the ground beneath them shift. That's the part no one tells you. Your softness was a structure. Your love was a system. Your attention was their emotional anchor. And now that it's gone, they're floating, lost, frantic, confused. But you're clear. You're grounded. You're free. And that freedom isn't cruel, it's necessary. You stop reacting to withdrawal and start respecting yourself for walking away. And that's the ultimate clarity. Not everyone who wants you deserves you. Not everyone who returns has good intentions. Your job is to protect the source. You are the source. And the moment you start treating your energy that way, everything changes. No more begging. No more explaining. No more apologizing for the boundary that saved your soul. You went cold, and they went crazy. Not because you broke them, but because you finally broke the cycle. 4. Common manipulation tactics they use once you pull away. The moment you go cold, the moment you stop giving your energy freely, something changes, not just in the silence between you, but in their entire approach to you. Because now, you're not playing by the same rules anymore. You're not the woman they could emotionally tug at with a half-hearted message or a breadcrumb of affection. You've stepped back. You've interrupted the pattern. And what follows next, almost like clockwork, is the desperate attempt to pull you back into their cycle, not with honesty, not with accountability, but with manipulation. They don't call it that, of course. But watch closely. When someone suddenly wants you back the moment they lose access to you, it's rarely transformation, it's strategy. The manipulator thrives in confusion, in blurred lines, in your emotional vulnerability. And once your energy is no longer theirs to feed on, they adapt fast. The first tactic? Love bombing. A sudden flood of affection, apologies, promises, grand declarations that feel like the love you always wanted but never consistently received. It's overwhelming. It feels real. It hits every part of your emotional longing. But here's what the Stoic woman understands: love bombing isn't love. It's a strategy to regain control. Because someone who truly means what they say doesn't need to overload you with intensity. They build with intention. They pace themselves with consistency. If his words are louder than his previous actions, pause. Observe. Ask, why now? What changed? Why the urgency now that I've gone silent? You'll find that the timing says more than the message. The next tactic is guilt tripping. Suddenly you're cold, distant, not who you used to be. He may say things like, "You've changed, you're being heartless." Or, "After everything I did for you?" This is an emotional ambush. It's meant to make you question your boundary, to make you feel like the bad one. The Stoic woman does not internalize guilt when she's choosing herself. He'll claim he's changed, that he's been in therapy, that he's working on himself, that he finally gets it. And maybe part of you wants to believe him. You remember his potential. You want to see him win. But Stoicism reminds you, potential is not proof. Change takes time, and real transformation doesn't beg for instant results. It shows up daily, quietly, with evidence, not proclamations. If he's suddenly a new man 2 days after you walked away, be cautious. True growth doesn't panic. It humbles itself. Then there's the tactic of creating false emergencies. Out of nowhere, he's going through something. He needs support. He's struggling. He reaches out not to reconnect but to test if he still owns your heart. He uses vulnerability as bait. The Stoic woman doesn't turn her back on empathy. Triangulation. He suddenly brings up other women. Exes. New. Friends. Posts cryptic photos. Mentions that someone else understands him now. This is designed to provoke jealousy. When none of that works, here comes the withdrawal reversal. He goes cold. He mirrors your distance. He tries to make you question who pulled away first. He gives silence to reclaim power. He pretends he doesn't care. But here's the key difference: your silence came from self-respect. His comes from strategy. Yours was a boundary. His is a bluff. Because the manipulator will do anything to regain control over your attention. The Stoic woman, however, remains unmoved. She's already walked through the fire of her own detachment. She's not shaken by silence because she found peace inside of it. This is where emotional mastery becomes your shield. When you recognize these tactics, not with anger, not with reaction. Because manipulation only works when you're still emotionally invested in the outcome. Once you truly let go, once you stop needing a specific ending, you take back your power. And yes, it hurts. Because manipulation often disguises itself as reconciliation. It speaks in a language that sounds familiar, words you wanted to hear, emotions you once begged for, attention you craved. But the Stoic woman knows, if it's not sustainable, it's not sincere. She is not flattered by sudden affection. She is not moved by theatrics. She's grounded, clear, anchored in her own worth. That's why manipulators hate losing her. Because once she sees the game, she can't unsee it. Once she reclaims her peace, she stops participating. And that silence? That clarity? It drives them crazy. They're left with their own reflection, the truth they've avoided, the growth they've resisted, the empty space they used to fill with your emotional labor. But now that space is yours again. It's sacred. And you're not giving it away easily. This is the power of Stoic relationships, not coldness, but control. Not indifference, but inner peace. Not revenge, but redirection. You don't need to expose them. Their own behavior does that. You don't need to get even. Your absence does that. And you don't need to chase closure. You are the closure. So let them play the game. And if you're ready to walk with this kind of calm, confident energy in every relationship from now on, hit that subscribe button. Because the next chapter goes even deeper. And you're not going to want to miss what's coming. 5. Why staying cold works better than begging ever did. There's a point in every woman's journey where she realizes that warmth alone doesn't win love. That effort, over-explaining, and emotional generosity can't make someone choose her if they were never ready to see her value. And in that moment, often after countless second chances and emotional gymnastics, something inside her snaps, but not in a loud, chaotic way. It snaps quietly, like a chord breaking in the background. She stops reaching, stops trying to fix, to prove, to please, and instead, she becomes still. Not passive, still. Because there's a difference between giving up and choosing peace. And that peace? That cold, grounded clarity? It does more to shift the dynamic than any apology, essay, or confession ever could. Staying cold, staying calm, staying in your power, those are not acts of cruelty. They're acts of self-preservation. They're decisions to stop playing a role in a one-sided performance. Because begging, no matter how heartfelt, always lowers your position in the energetic equation. You're putting yourself beneath someone who has shown you, either by action or neglect, that they don't match your frequency. Stoicism teaches us not to chase emotion, but to examine it. And when you say that with your energy, not your words, it hits different. It repositions the dynamic. It forces the other person to reckon with your absence instead of using your availability as a cushion. Because as long as you beg, they never have to reflect. As long as you plead, they never have to lead. As long as you remain emotionally available, they never have to question their own readiness. That's the hidden cost of being too emotionally generous. You shield people from their own growth. But when you go cold, when you stop being the buffer between them and their consequences, things shift. Now they have to feel. They have to notice the silence. They have to sit in the emptiness where your validation used to live. And for many, that's terrifying. Not because they realize they lost the love of their life, but because they realize they no longer have someone absorbing the emotional weight they refuse to carry. Coldness comes from clarity. Begging says, "Please love me." Coldness says, "I love me, even if you don't." And that shift? That's where everything starts to realign. But here's the part no one tells you. This doesn't happen because you forced them. It happens because you removed yourself. Power is not always loud. Sometimes it's absence. Sometimes it's neutrality. Sometimes it's the quiet resolve of a woman who finally sees her worth clearly enough to stop auditioning for someone who can't recognize it. That's why staying cold works. It disrupts the energy. It creates space. And in that space, the truth is revealed. Either they rise to meet you, or they remain where they are, and you finally see them clearly. Either way, you win. You win because you no longer abandon yourself for the illusion of connection. You no longer bleed emotionally in hopes of being chosen. You no longer hustle for approval in a space that was never built to receive you fully. Stoic relationships are born from this energy, where both people are self-led, where both know their value, where love is not begged for, but chosen, calmly, clearly, consistently. And until you meet someone who can offer that, staying cold isn't rude, it's responsible. I am not here to fix. I am here to feel safe. And if that's too much for you, then maybe I am too much for you, and that's okay. That mindset, that inner calm, creates attraction more powerful than beauty, words, or status ever could. Because emotional stability is rare. And when a man senses it, especially from a woman he once had emotional control over, it stirs something deep. He starts to chase, not because you manipulated him, but because you removed the very thing he took for granted. And in that absence, he meets himself, his fears, his regrets, his patterns. And while he's unraveling, you're unbothered. Because you no longer need a reaction to feel seen. You no longer crave a response to feel validated. You know what you bring. And you know the right one won't need to lose you to recognize it. That's what Stoicism offers in relationships, not detachment from feeling, but detachment from fantasy. It breaks the need to perform. To soften your boundary just to keep the peace, pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, what do I gain by staying cold? What do I lose by performing warmth that isn't being reciprocated? That your coldness does what your words never could, it tells the truth. Not just to them, but to yourself. And in that truth, you find freedom. Not because you won them back. 6. Turning the tables: how to keep the power once he comes back. You can feel his energy pulling at you again, suddenly aware of your absence, suddenly remembering your presence, suddenly ready to talk, to apologize, to revisit what he once dismissed. And you're in a very different place. You're no longer operating from confusion. You're no longer fantasizing about his potential. You've sat in silence long enough to hear the truth. You're clearer, calmer. And now the question isn't, will he come back? Because he did. The question is, what are you going to do now that he's here? Because this is where most women give their power away, right here, in the moment he returns. In the first response. In the first emotional flicker. And if you don't stay grounded, if you don't stay stoic, you'll undo everything you've built. You'll start justifying the past. You'll make excuses for his silence. You'll soften your boundary just to feel the buzz of attention again. That's the test. Because they always come back. The real question is, have you evolved? And if you have, then here's what must shift. You now lead the dynamic. You're no longer responding as the version of you who was once emotionally dependent. You're now the version who knows what she brings. Who has felt the emptiness and chosen peace over pretense. Who doesn't flinch when someone circles back because she understands that attention is not commitment, and effort is not always investment. Not by playing hard to get, but by holding your new standard so firmly that it filters the real from the temporary. Because if he came back just to escape the silence, he'll show it. He'll fumble when he realizes you're no longer emotionally accessible on demand. He'll get frustrated that the old buttons don't work. He'll try charm, pressure, even guilt. In how he doesn't demand access, but earns it. In how he rebuilds trust not with intensity, but with consistency. That's the thing about Stoicism. It slows you down enough to see clearly. Because when you were emotional, you moved too fast. You made decisions from longing, not logic. You gave too much credit for breadcrumbs. But now, you're watching with wisdom. And that wisdom creates a filter. If his energy shifts when you don't respond the way he expects, that's your answer. If he disappears again when you don't fold, that's your closure. If he sticks around, respects the new you, adapts to the new boundary, and stays even when you're not emotionally feeding him, now that's information. That's data. Because consistency over time is the only truth teller. And while you wait for that, your energy stays with you. That's how you turn the tables. You're no longer giving effort for potential. You're requiring proof of presence. You're no longer explaining your value. You're watching to see if he recognizes it. You're no longer chasing connection. You're observing alignment. And if he meets you there, if he proves that this time it's not about winning you back, but building something new, then you can slowly open up. But never fully, all at once. You open from discernment. From awareness. From your center. And if he can hold that version of you, if he starts slipping, rushing, provoking, testing, then you know, the energy didn't match. And you let it go. Not because you don't care, but because you care about yourself more. Because the real transformation didn't happen when he came back. It happened when you didn't collapse the second he did. When you held your peace. When you trusted yourself. When you realized you never needed him to act right to validate your worth. That's the foundation of Stoic relationships, not a constant emotional high, but a calm knowing. A mutual clarity. A bond not driven by fear of loss but by respect for each other's emotional sovereignty. And to maintain that, you must constantly return to your center. That means not answering every message. That means not romanticizing his effort too soon. That means not measuring love by how hard he comes back, but by how long he stays when things are steady. Because real men don't only show up when you go cold. They stay consistent even when things are calm. They don't just chase you, they align with you. Even if a part of you still wants to believe. Because sometimes they return just to make sure you're still emotionally available. And when they see you're not, they leave again. That's not love. That's ego maintenance. But you're past that. You're walking into a season where your value is not determined by how badly someone wants you back, but by how well they show up when they have you. And if no one meets you there, you still win. Because you're not cold for attention. You're calm for protection. You're not distant out of fear. You're grounded out of truth. That's what it means to turn the tables. Not to play power games, but to reclaim emotional self-respect. And when you live from that space, everything changes. Your presence no longer needs to prove itself. Your silence no longer seeks validation. Your worth no longer rides on how they react. You are steady. You are self-led. You are sovereign. And the right one will recognize that not as a threat, but as the rare, grounded power that it is. If this part resonated with you, if you feel yourself rising into this version of you, like this video and comment, number 1, to claim your emotional power today. And don't forget to subscribe if you're ready to walk this path with more wisdom, clarity, and calm power, because what comes next will help you never lose yourself again. In the end, everything comes down to the moment you stopped trying. The moment you no longer needed to convince anyone of your worth. The moment you turned your energy inward instead of constantly extending it outward in hopes of being chosen. That shift didn't just change the dynamic, it changed you. You went cold, and they went crazy. But their chaos wasn't your responsibility. It was their reckoning. It was the consequence of taking your presence for granted. Your emotional openness that they thought it was infinite. But it wasn't. Because you are not a resource to be consumed. You are not a performance to be applauded only when convenient. You are not a background character in someone else's emotional story. You are the main event. And when you finally saw that, you stopped offering yourself to those who only understood your value in hindsight. This isn't about bitterness. It's about boundaries. It's about no longer betraying yourself in the name of loyalty. It's about ending the cycle of emotional overfunctioning, where you gave and they took, where you bent and they barely noticed, where you stayed and they assumed you always would. That's what Stoicism teaches us, not to feel less, but to protect what we feel. Not to harden, but to honor. And honoring your emotions means recognizing when your warmth is being wasted. It means allowing your silence to speak for you when words no longer reach them. It means giving yourself closure by choosing yourself, again and again, even when it hurts. Because growth always does. Real change always feels like loss at first. You mourn the version of you who once tolerated what you now find unacceptable. You grieve the connection that almost was, that should have been. That maybe could have been, if only they had met you with the same depth. But they didn't. And maybe they couldn't. And that's not your failure. That's your freedom. Because when you stop trying to change people and instead change what you allow, your entire emotional reality shifts. You no longer look for signs that someone cares, you watch their consistency. You no longer decode mixed signals, you wait for clarity. You no longer argue with potential, you require presence. And in that presence you learn how rare it is. How most people are used to operating from ego, from habit, from convenience. Very few are willing to rise into conscious, intentional connection. Very few are willing to sit in discomfort and grow. But you did. You chose to grow. You chose to get uncomfortable. You chose to detach not because you didn't care, but because you cared too much to stay in a space where you were shrinking. That is your strength. That is your legacy. And that is what makes you unforgettable, not because you begged, or broke down, or played their game better than they did, but because you walked away with grace. Because you loved with purity and let go with power. Because you didn't become hard, you became clear. And clarity will always confuse people who were never honest with themselves. That's why they went crazy. Because your silence exposed their noise. Because your peace made their dysfunction louder. Because your detachment highlighted their emotional immaturity. And once the mirror was in front of them, they couldn't look away. That's the beauty of Stoic relationships. You're no longer reacting to chaos, you're observing it. You're no longer attached to outcomes, you're trusting alignment. You're no longer measuring love by intensity, but by integrity. And from that place, you no longer feel the need to prove your worth. You become the kind of woman who attracts by existing, who commands respect by standing still, who invites love not with force, but with presence. A love that doesn't need to be earned through sacrifice. A love that doesn't require your silence or your suffering. A love that can hold space for your full expression. But until that love arrives, you're not in waiting, you're in wholeness. You're not empty, you're expanding. You're not lacking, you're leveling up. And every time you choose yourself, every time you stay cold when chaos knocks, every time you walk away from manipulation, from inconsistency, from emotional laziness, you prove to the world, and more importantly to yourself, that your standard is not a threat. It's a filter. It's the boundary that protects your peace. It's the quiet strength that turns a woman into a force. And the world will try to convince you to lower it, to soften, to bend, to explain. But you don't need to explain your growth to people who only saw your value when they lost access to it. Let them wonder. Let them replay the moments they dismissed. Let them scroll through memories and feel the absence of your energy. That absence was once their privilege. Now it's their lesson. And your life? It keeps going. It gets richer, more aligned, more grounded. Because the woman who no longer needs to beg, to chase, to be chosen, is the woman who finally sees herself. That is your power. That is your truth. That is the energy you carry forward, not as a warning, but as a quiet revolution. And the ones meant for you will meet you there, not because you demanded it, but because you embodied it.